Her father didn't ask who got her pregnant. He just tied her hands, threw her in the wagon, and traded her away like livestock to a mountain man who looked at her like she was another burden he didn't want to carry. Virginia Campbell had always known her father's love came with conditions, but she'd never imagined those conditions would lead to this moment. Standing barefoot in the Montana snow, her belly swollen with shame, watching him disappear down the mountain trail without so much as a backward glance. The rope burns on her wrists were still raw from the wagon ride. 3 days of bone-jarring travel over terrain that barely qualified as a trail, with nothing but hardtack and stream water to sustain her. Her father, Thomas Campbell, had spoken exactly 14 words during the entire journey. "You made your choice, girl. Now live with the consequences." But Virginia hadn't chosen anything. She'd been 17 and foolish, believing the sweet words of Jonathan Rivers, the banker's son who'd promised her marriage and respectability. Instead, he'd given her this swelling belly and a reputation that made her father's jaw clench with barely contained rage every time he looked at her. "It's your shame," Thomas had growled the morning he'd dragged her from her bed before dawn. "You'll live with it or die with it. I won't have your sin rotting this house any longer." Now she stood in front of a cabin that looked like it had been carved from the mountain itself. Rough-hewn logs chinked with moss and mud, a stone chimney leaking thin wisps of smoke into the gray November sky. The man who'd accepted her father's payment stood in the doorway, a figure that seemed to fill the entire frame. Nathan Blackwood was nothing like the men from town, where they wore carefully pressed shirts and spoke in measured tones. He was all sharp edges and weathered leather. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and his beard was thick enough to hide whatever expression might have crossed his face when her father had made his offer. $200 in the girl, Thomas had said, his voice carrying the casual tone of a man conducting routine business. "She can cook and sew, and she's not sickly. The child's not yours to worry about. Just keep her alive long enough to birth it, and you can decide what to do with both of them after." Nathan had counted the money twice, his pale blue eyes never quite meeting Virginia's terrified gaze. "Fair enough," he'd said, and that had been the end of Virginia Campbell's old life. Now, as the sound of her father's wagon wheels faded into the distance, she was left with nothing but the wind cutting through her threadbare dress and the weight of the child growing inside her. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "You coming in or planning to freeze to death on my porch?" Nathan's voice was gravelly, unused to conversation. Virginia lifted her chin, summoning what little dignity she had left. "I suppose I don't have much choice." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or approval. "No, I reckon you don't." The cabin's interior was Spartan but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its warmth immediately embracing her frozen limbs. There was a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves lined with supplies that spoke of a man who prepared for long winters and longer silences. Nathan moved past her to tend the fire, adding logs with the efficient motions of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times. "There's a pot of stew on the hearth," he said without turning around. "Help yourself." Virginia's stomach clenched at the mention of food. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten a proper meal. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "Don't thank me yet," Nathan replied, finally facing her. His eyes were harder than the stone beneath their feet. "Your father paid for shelter and food until the child comes. After that, we'll see what you are worth keeping around for." The words hit her like a physical blow, but Virginia forced herself not to flinch. She'd shed enough tears over the past few months. This mountain man wouldn't see her break. "I can work," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm not afraid of hard labor." Nathan's gaze traveled down to her swollen belly, then back to her face. "We'll see," he said again, then turned back to the fire, dismissing her as effectively as if she'd never spoken. As Virginia ladled stew into a wooden bowl with trembling hands, she tried to ignore the voice in her head that whispered she'd simply traded one prison for another. At least this one was warm, and the man who now owned her hadn't raised his hand to her. Yet. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, and Virginia Campbell realized that whatever came next, there would be no going back. The girl who'd believed in sweet promises and fairy tale endings had died somewhere on that wagon ride. The woman who would survive this mountain would have to be someone entirely different. The first night in Nathan Blackwood's cabin, Virginia learned three things about her new reality. The man who now owned her snored like a hibernating bear. The wind through the mountain peaks sounded like voices of the damned, and pregnancy made sleep nearly impossible even when exhaustion weighed on her like a stone. She lay on the narrow cot Nathan had grudgingly provided, listening to the symphony of his breathing from across the room. He'd given her the bed without ceremony, claiming the floor near the fireplace for himself. Whether this was kindness or simple practicality, she couldn't tell. Nothing about Nathan Blackwood was easy to read. The stew had been surprisingly good, thick with venison and root vegetables that spoke of a man who knew how to survive in isolation. But it sat heavy in her stomach now, along with the weight of everything that had led her to this moment. Jonathan Rivers seemed like a character from someone else's story, a boy who'd whispered pretty lies in her ear while she'd been foolish enough to believe them. "Your reputation is ruined anyway," he'd said when she'd told him about the baby. "Might as well make the best of a bad situation." Making the best of a bad situation? That seemed to be all she'd be doing from now on. Dawn came gray and reluctant, filtering through windows that needed cleaning. Virginia woke to the sound of Nathan moving around the cabin with practiced quiet, building up the fire and preparing what smelled like coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute her family had been forced to drink since money grew tight. "You planning to sleep all day?" Nathan's voice carried no particular malice, but no warmth either. Virginia pushed herself upright, her back protesting the unfamiliar mattress. "No, sir. I was just—" "Don't call me sir." Nathan poured coffee into 2 tin cups, setting one on the table. "Name's Nathan. Use it." She nodded, unsure of the protocol in this strange new arrangement. Was she a guest? A servant? Property? The lines seemed deliberately blurred. "Can you cook?" Nathan asked, settling into one of the chairs with his coffee. "Yes." Virginia's voice was stronger now. "I can make bread, stews, preserved vegetables. My mother taught me before she died." Nathan studied her over the rim of his cup. "Good. I can hunt and trap, but I'm tired of burning beans and eating charcoal that used to be meat." He gestured toward the kitchen area. "There's supplies in the pantry. Make yourself useful." The dismissal was clear, but Virginia found herself grateful for something to do. Idle hands led to idle thoughts, and she couldn't afford to dwell on what she'd lost. Survival required looking forward, not back. She spent the morning exploring the cabin's modest supplies and planning meals that would stretch their provisions through what looked to be a harsh winter. Nathan disappeared after breakfast, returning at midday with a brace of rabbits and news that made her blood run cold. "Storm's coming," he said, hanging the rabbits from a hook near the door. "Big one, by the look of the sky. We'll be snowed in for days, maybe a week." Virginia felt the walls of the cabin shrink around her. Trapped. Alone with a man she didn't know, carrying a child that grew heavier by the day, with nowhere to run even if she'd had the strength to try. "You look green," Nathan observed, not unkindly. "Morning sickness?" Heat flooded her cheeks. Men didn't discuss such things, at least not the men she'd known. It comes and goes." Nathan nodded as if this was perfectly normal conversation. "My sister had the same trouble when she was carrying. Ginger tea helped, but I don't have any up here. Mint might work just as well." The casual mention of his sister humanized him in a way that caught Virginia off guard. "You have family?" Something shuddered in Nathan's expression. "Had. They're gone now." The finality in his voice killed any further questions. Virginia turned her attention to skinning the rabbits, grateful for the practical task. Her hands were steady, despite everything. Her mother had made sure she could handle the unpleasant necessities of frontier life. "You know your way around a knife," Nathan said, watching her work. "I had to learn. Papa wasn't much for helping with kitchen work, said it was women's business." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "But he had no trouble trading you away when women's business became inconvenient." The words hit like a slap, true and cruel in equal measure. Virginia's hand stilled on the knife. "He did what he thought was best," Nathan snorted. "He did what was easiest for him, Don't pretty it up with noble intentions. Anger flared in Virginia's chest, hot and unexpected. You don't know anything about my family or what we've been through. I know enough. Nathan's voice was steady, matter of fact. I know a man who'd sell his pregnant daughter to a stranger isn't worth defending. He didn't sell me, Virginia said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Nathan raised an eyebrow. What do you call taking money in exchange for a person? The question hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Virginia couldn't answer it because she knew he was right. Her father had sold her, plain and simple. All the righteous anger and talk about shame and family honor had just been dressing on a transaction that reduced her to livestock. I'm not livestock, she said quietly, more to herself than to Nathan. No, he agreed. You're not. But you're not free either, are you? The storm hit that evening with a fury that made the cabin shake. Wind howled around the eaves like living things trying to claw their way inside, and snow piled against the windows until the outside world disappeared entirely. Virginia had never felt so isolated, so completely cut off from everything familiar. She cooked dinner, rabbit stew with the last of the fresh vegetables, while Nathan reinforced the shutters and checked the chimney for blockages. They worked around each other with careful efficiency, neither speaking more than necessary. Good stew, Nathan said when they sat down to eat. Thank you. Virginia picked at her food, her appetite strangled by anxiety and the baby's increasing demands on her body. You need to eat more, Nathan observed. Baby's taking what it needs from you, whether you feed it proper or not. The casual knowledge unsettled her. How do you know about pregnancy? Nathan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, like I said, my sister. She had 3 children before. He trailed off, jaw tightening. Before what? Before they died, all of them. Fever took the children first, then her husband gave up and drank himself to death. Nathan's voice was flat, empty of emotion. Left me with nothing but graves to tend and a cabin too big for one man. Virginia felt something shift inside her, a reluctant sympathy for the man who'd spoken of her like a burden. I'm sorry, Nathan shrugged. World's full of sorry. Doesn't change anything. It changes how we treat each other, Virginia said softly. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. Maybe. We'll see. After dinner, Nathan carved while Virginia mended a tear in her dress by firelight. The silence between them was less hostile now, more like the quiet of 2 wounded animals sharing shelter from a storm. What will happen when the baby comes? Virginia asked eventually. Nathan's knife paused in its work. Depends. On what? On whether you plan to stay or keep running. The question caught her off guard. Where would I go? Anywhere. Once the child's born and you've recovered, you're free to leave. I won't stop you. Virginia stared at him. But my father paid you. Your father paid for food and shelter until you're back on your feet. Nothing more. Nathan resumed his carving, a small bird taking shape under his skilled hands. I'm not in the market for a wife or a family. Never have been. The words should have been comforting, but instead they left Virginia feeling strangely hollow. And if I have nowhere to go? Then I suppose you'll stay until you figure something else out. Just like that. Nathan set down his knife and met her gaze. Just like that. But if you stay, you work. This isn't charity and I'm not your keeper. You pull your weight or you find somewhere else to do it. Virginia nodded, understanding the terms. They weren't generous, but they were fair. More fair than anything she'd been offered in months. I can work, she said. I'm not afraid of hard labor. Good, because mountain life doesn't make allowances for delicate sensibilities. That night, as the storm raged outside and the fire settled into glowing embers, Virginia lay awake thinking about choices and consequences. For the first time since learning about the baby, she felt something other than fear or despair. Not hope, exactly. That was too much to ask for, but possibility maybe. The chance that she could build something from the wreckage of her old life, even if it wasn't what she dreamed of as a girl. Nathan was right about one thing. The world was full of sorry, and it didn't change anything. But sometimes Virginia was beginning to understand. Sorry wasn't what you needed to survive. Sometimes you just needed someone willing to give you a chance to prove you were worth more than the price your father had accepted for you. Outside, the wind began to die down, and Virginia finally drifted off to sleep, one hand resting on her growing belly and her mind, for the first time in months, quiet with something that might have been peace. Virginia woke to pain that cut through her like a blade heated in the fire. Not the familiar ache that had become her constant companion over the past month, but something sharper, more urgent, something wrong. She pressed her hand to her belly and felt it, wetness, warm and spreading beneath her nightgown. In the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the cabin windows, she could see the dark stains spreading across the rough cotton fabric. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible in the stillness. "Please, no." The baby had been moving just yesterday, tiny flutters that reminded her she wasn't completely alone in the world. Now there was only pain and the terrible knowledge that something had gone horribly wrong. "Nathan," her voice cracked on his name, fear making it difficult to speak louder than a whisper. He was on his feet before she'd finished saying it, moving from his bedroll by the fire with the swift efficiency of a man accustomed to emergencies. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "How much blood?" His voice was calm, clinical, but Virginia caught the tension beneath the surface. She pulled back the blanket with trembling hands. The stain was larger now, spreading down her legs and onto the mattress. "I don't know. I just woke up and—" "All right." Nathan crossed to her in 3 quick strides. "Don't move. Just stay still and breathe." His hands were gentle as he helped her lie flat, positioning pillows under her legs with movements that spoke of experience she didn't want to think about. Where had he learned to handle a crisis like this? How many women had he watched bleed their children away? "The baby," Virginia whispered, tears starting to flow despite her efforts to stay strong. "Is the baby—" "Too early to tell." Nathan pulled a clean cloth from his supplies and pressed it firmly against her. "Sometimes bleeding doesn't mean what you think it means. Sometimes women spot throughout pregnancy and deliver healthy children." "Sometimes?" Nathan met her eyes, his expression serious but not without compassion. "Sometimes they don't. But we're not there yet, so don't borrow trouble." He moved around the cabin with purposeful efficiency, stoking the fire higher, setting water to boil, gathering supplies Virginia recognized from her mother's birthing kit. Clean cloths, strong thread, a bottle of whiskey that would serve as both antiseptic and anesthetic if things went badly. "What can I do?" Virginia asked, desperate to feel useful instead of helpless. "Stay still. Keep pressure here." Nathan guided her hand to the cloth. "And tell me if the pain gets worse or if you feel dizzy." The pain was already worse, cramping through her abdomen in waves that made her bite down on her lip to keep from crying out. She'd heard women talk about miscarriage in hushed tones, always with the understanding that it was God's will and not to be questioned. But lying here watching her blood seep through cloth after cloth, Virginia found herself questioning everything. "Why is this happening?" she asked when Nathan returned with warm water and fresh bandages. "Could be any number of things." He knelt beside her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he worked. "Stress, poor nutrition, just bad luck. Most times there's no reason that makes sense. My father said this baby was God's punishment for my sins." Nathan's hand stilled. "Your father was an ignorant fool." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "You don't believe in divine punishment? I believe in a lot of things." Nathan resumed his work, changing the blood-soaked cloth for a clean one. "But I don't believe any God worth worshiping would punish a child for its parents' mistakes, and I sure as hell don't believe pregnancy is a sin that needs punishing." Virginia studied his profile in the firelight. "You sound like you've given this some thought." "My sister believed the same nonsense your father preached. Spent her whole pregnancy with her first child, convinced she'd done something wrong because she couldn't keep food down. Nearly starved herself trying to atone for imaginary sins. But she had 3 children. They lived. They lived until fever took them. And you know what she said when they were dying?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "She said it was her fault. Said God was punishing her for being too happy, for loving them too much." The pain in his voice was rawer than anything Virginia had expected from the taciturn mountain man. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for her. Nathan stood, carrying the bloodied cloths to the fire. Be angry. Be furious that women are taught to blame themselves for every tragedy that befalls them, while men walk away from their responsibilities without a second thought. Virginia watched him feed the cloths to the flames, his movements sharp with suppressed emotion. Is that what you think Jonathan did? Walked away from his responsibilities? Didn't he? The simple question hit harder than any accusation. Yes, Jonathan had walked away, had denied her, denied the child, denied any connection between them, had let her face the consequences alone while he continued his life as if she'd never existed. Yes, Virginia admitted quietly. He did. Nathan returned to her side, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead to check for fever. Then stop making excuses for him, and stop making excuses for your father. Both of them failed you when you needed them most. But if the baby dies, then we'll bury it proper and mourn it proper, and it still won't be your fault. Nathan's eyes held hers steadily. You understand me? Virginia nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. A lifetime of being told that women were responsible for everything that went wrong in the world was hard to shake off with a few words, no matter how kindly meant. The hours that followed passed in a haze of pain and fear. Nathan stayed close, checking on her regularly, bringing her water and broth she couldn't keep down, changing bloodied cloths with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who'd seen worse. Tell me about your sister, Virginia said during one of the quieter moments, when the cramping had eased enough for her to think about something other than the possibility of loss. Nathan was whittling near the fire, his hands working automatically while he kept one eye on her. What do you want to know? What was she like? Stubborn, fierce, laughed too loud and cried too easily. A small smile touched Nathan's lips. She would have liked you, I think. Why? Because you're still fighting. Even scared out of your mind and bleeding all over my sheets, you're still fighting. Virginia didn't feel like she was fighting. She felt like she was drowning, going under inch by inch with nothing solid to hold on to. I don't know how to fight something like this. You don't fight it. You endure it. There's a difference. How? Nathan set down his carving and looked at her directly. You breathe. You take whatever comes, good or bad, and you keep breathing. And when it's over, you figure out what comes next. And if the baby doesn't survive, then you mourn and you heal and you decide whether you want to try again someday with someone who deserves you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Virginia searched Nathan's face for meaning, but his expression had shuddered again, revealing nothing. The crisis peaked near sunset. Virginia woke from a fitful doze to pain so intense she couldn't bite back her cry. Nathan was beside her instantly, his hands on her forehead, her pulse, speaking in low, soothing tones that barely penetrated the haze of agony. I can't, she gasped. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Nathan's voice was steady, unshakable. You're stronger than you know. I'm not strong. I'm just scared. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. The pain reached a crescendo that left Virginia gasping, certain something inside her had torn beyond repair. Then gradually it began to ebb. The bleeding slowed. The cramping eased to something bearable. And deep inside, so faint she might have imagined it, she felt movement. The baby, she whispered, her hand flying to her belly. It's still moving. Nathan checked the cloths, his expression cautious but hopeful. Bleeding stopped. That's good. Virginia closed her eyes, overwhelmed with relief so intense it made her dizzy. It's alive. Seems like it, but you need to rest now. Real rest. No getting up, no trying to help with anything. Just lie still and let your body heal. For how long? As long as it takes. That evening, as Nathan prepared a simple dinner of broth and bread, Virginia watched him move around the cabin with new eyes. He'd spent an entire day caring for her with the dedication of a husband or brother, asking for nothing in return except that she follow his instructions. Why? She asked when he brought her a cup of warm broth. Why what? Why did you take such good care of me today? You could have just let nature take its course. Nathan sat heavily in the chair beside her bed, suddenly looking every one of his 30 years. Because everyone deserves someone to care whether they live or die. And because, he trailed off, staring into the fire. Because what? Because I couldn't save my sister when she needed me. Maybe helping you helps balance the scales somehow. Virginia reached out instinctively, covering his work-roughened hand with her smaller one. You're a good man, Nathan Blackwood. He looked down at their joined hands, something complicated passing across his features. No, I'm not, but I try to do right when I can. That's all any of us can do. Nathan nodded, but he didn't pull his hand away. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low, and the darkness outside pressed against the windows. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Virginia felt something she hadn't dared hope for. Safety. Not just physical safety, though Nathan had certainly provided that. Something deeper, the safety that came from being seen as more than a burden or a transaction, the safety of being cared for without conditions or expectations. It wasn't love. She wasn't fool enough to mistake practical kindness for romantic affection. But it was something precious nonetheless, something worth fighting for, worth enduring for. As sleep finally claimed her, Virginia's last thought was a promise to herself and to the child still growing inside her. They would survive this. Whatever came next, they would find a way to survive it together. 3 weeks after the bleeding stopped, Virginia had begun to believe she might actually survive both the pregnancy and the mountain winter. The baby moved regularly now, strong kicks that reassured her even when they kept her awake at night. Nathan had proven himself a surprisingly capable caretaker, checking on her recovery with the same methodical attention he gave to maintaining his traps and supplies. She'd even begun to find a rhythm in their daily routine, cooking meals that didn't taste like charcoal, mending Nathan's clothes, organizing the cabin with a woman's touch it had clearly lacked. In return, Nathan had carved her a proper chair with a back that supported her growing belly and had begun leaving small gifts on the windowsill, smooth stones, interesting pieces of wood, once a single wildflower that had somehow survived the early snows. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was something approaching contentment, which was why the sound of approaching hoofbeats on that crisp December morning sent ice through Virginia's veins. Nathan heard them first, his hand automatically moving to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. "Stay inside," he said quietly, stepping onto the porch with the weapon held ready but not raised. Virginia pressed herself against the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. A lone rider was picking his way carefully up the mountain trail, and even at a distance, there was something familiar about his posture, the way he sat his horse. Her breath caught in her throat. "Sam? You know him?" Nathan asked without taking his eyes off the approaching figure. "That's my brother." Virginia was already moving toward the door, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and terror. "Samuel. He's only 15. What's he doing here?" Virginia had no answer. The last time she'd seen Sam, her father had been dragging her from their house while her brother had stood helpless in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. Their father had forbidden him from speaking to her, from even acknowledging her existence. The rider drew closer, and Virginia could see she'd been right. It was Sam, taller than when she'd last seen him, his face leaner with the sharp angles of approaching manhood, but unmistakably her little brother. He rode with the exhausted slump of someone who'd been traveling hard for days. Nathan kept the rifle ready as Sam approached the cabin. "That's close enough," he called when the boy was still 20 yards away. Sam reined in his horse, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm looking for my sister, Virginia Campbell. I was told she might be here." "Who told you that?" Nathan's voice was flat, dangerous. "A man in town. Said he'd sold her to a mountain man for $200. Sam's voice cracked on the words, pain and anger warring in his young face. Virginia couldn't stand it anymore. She pushed past Nathan onto the porch, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. "Sam! Sam, it's me!" Her brother's face transformed at the sight of her, relief and anguish chasing each other across his features. He dismounted quickly, taking a step forward before Nathan's voice stopped him. "Easy, boy. She's been through a lot. No sudden moves." Sam's eyes took in Virginia's obviously pregnant state, the way she held herself, the protective stance Nathan had taken beside her. His jaw clenched with fury that looked far too old for his 15 years. "He really did it," Sam said, his voice hollow. "Father really sold you. Sam, like you were livestock, like you were nothing." Tears were streaming down Sam's face now, but his voice was steady. "I tried to stop him, Ginny. I swear I tried." Virginia felt her own tears starting. "I know you did. It's not your fault." "The hell it isn't." Sam wiped his nose on his sleeve, a gesture so achingly familiar it made Virginia's chest tight. "I should have fought harder, should have stopped him somehow." "You were just a boy," Nathan said quietly, lowering his rifle. "Sometimes there's nothing a boy can do against a grown man's cruelty." Sam looked at Nathan with suspicious eyes. "And what did you do? Take advantage of a pregnant girl who had nowhere else to go?" The accusation hung in the cold air like smoke. Virginia saw Nathan's jaw tighten, saw the way his hand flexed around the rifle stock, and she stepped between them before either could say something that would make this worse. "Nathan has been kind to me," she said firmly. "Kinder than anyone has been in months. He saved my life when I was bleeding, and he's never once laid a hand on me or demanded anything I wasn't willing to give." Sam's eyes flicked between them, trying to read the dynamic he'd walked into. "Then why are you still here? If he's not keeping you prisoner, why haven't you come home?" The question cut deep because Virginia didn't have a simple answer. Home to what? To her father's rage and the town's whispers? To Jonathan Rivers' family using their influence to ensure she never found work or shelter anywhere decent? To a life of shame and struggle with no one to help her raise the child she carried? "Because," she said finally, "I don't have a home to go back to. Father made that clear when he traded me for $200. "Things have changed," Sam said desperately. "Father's gone, Ginny. Left 3 days after he brought you here. Just packed up and rode out without a word to anyone." Virginia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, he's not coming back. Left me with the house and debts I can't pay, and neighbors asking questions he didn't want to answer." Nathan was watching this exchange with sharp attention, his rifle now held casually at his side but ready to be raised if needed. "Questions about what?" Sam looked uncomfortable. "About where Virginia went, about why she wasn't seen at Sunday service anymore, about whether it was true that Thomas Campbell had sold his pregnant daughter to settle his gambling debts." "Gambling debts?" Virginia's voice was barely a whisper. "He'd been losing money for months. Poker games at the saloon, bad investments, loans he couldn't repay. The $200 you brought him?" Sam's voice broke. "That wasn't punishment money, Ginny. That was survival money. He sold you to keep from losing the house." The words hit Virginia like physical blows. All her father's talk about shame and sin, about doing what was necessary to preserve the family honor, it had all been lies. He'd sold her not to punish her sins, but to cover his own. "I'm sorry," Sam continued, his young voice thick with pain. "I'm so sorry, Ginny. If I'd known, if I'd understood what he was really doing." "You couldn't have stopped him," Virginia said automatically, but the words felt hollow. Her father had looked her in the eye and spoken of divine justice while bartering her away for gambling money. Nathan stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. "What do you want from her, boy?" Sam straightened, trying to project an authority his 15 years couldn't quite support. "I want her to come home with me. I want us to be a family again, like we were before all this happened." "And how would that work?" Nathan's voice was deceptively mild. "Pregnant woman, newborn baby, teenage boy trying to run a household with no money and debts hanging over your head." "We'd manage," Sam said stubbornly. "Families stick together." "Some families do," Nathan replied. "Others sell their pregnant daughters to strangers." The cruel accuracy of the statement made Sam flinch, but he didn't back down. "That was father, not us. Ginny and I. We're different." Virginia felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, Sam's desperate need to rebuild what their father had destroyed, Nathan's unspoken question about whether she would choose the known hardships of family over the uncertain future they'd been building together. I need time to think, she said finally. What's to think about? Sam asked, desperation creeping into his voice. I'm your brother. I came all this way to bring you home. You came all this way without considering what that home might look like now, Nathan said bluntly. Your sister's 7 months pregnant, probably more. She needs stability, proper food, someone who knows what they're doing when the baby comes. What can you offer her besides good intentions? Sam's face flushed red. I can offer her family. I can offer her love. What can you offer besides isolation and safety? Virginia said quietly, the words stopping both men mid-argument. He can offer me safety. Sam stared at her. Safety from what? From the people who care about you. Safety from being judged. Safety from being whispered about. Safety from men like Jonathan Rivers, who think pregnant women are fair game for whatever cruelty amuses them. Virginia's voice grew stronger with each word. Safety from having to explain myself to everyone who thinks they know my story better than I do. But we're family, Sam said, and the hurt in his voice nearly broke her heart. Yes, we are. But family isn't just blood, Sam. It's also about who takes care of you when you need it most. Nathan had gone very still beside her, and Virginia realized what her words might sound like to him. She turned to meet his eyes, searching for some sign of what he was thinking, but his expression was carefully neutral. I'm not saying I've made my decision, she added quickly, but I need time to consider what's best for the baby. Sam nodded reluctantly. How much time? Virginia looked at Nathan, who shrugged slightly. The choice was hers to make. Until after the baby comes, until I've recovered enough to travel safely. That could be months. Then you're welcome to wait if you want to. There's room in the shed, and Nathan can always use help with the winter work. Sam looked between them, clearly trying to understand the dynamics he'd stumbled into. And what happens after the baby's born? What happens when you've recovered? Virginia rested her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the child move restlessly inside her. Then I decide what kind of life I want to build for us, and with whom. The words hung in the cold mountain air, a promise and a warning both. 3 people, 3 different visions of the future, and a child who would inherit whatever choice Virginia finally made. It wasn't the reunion any of them had imagined, but it was the reality they would have to navigate together, one day at a time, until the mountain winter released its grip and forced them all to choose their paths forward. Sam had been at the cabin for 2 weeks when the first real danger found them. He'd settled into the rhythm of mountain life with surprising adaptability, helping Nathan with the endless tasks that winter survival demanded. Chopping wood, checking traps, maintaining the shed where he'd made his temporary home. The tension between the 2 men had eased somewhat, though Virginia could still feel the undercurrent of competition whenever they were in the same room. She was kneading bread dough when Nathan burst through the door, his face grim with urgency. We've got trouble, he said, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace. Sam, get in here, now! Sam appeared from the woodshed, axe still in hand, alerted by Nathan's tone. What kind of trouble? 3 riders coming up the trail, moving fast but trying to stay hidden. Nathan checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. They've been watching the cabin from the tree line for the past hour. Virginia felt ice settle in her stomach. At 8 months pregnant, she was in no condition to run or fight. The baby seemed to sense her distress, kicking restlessly against her ribs. Could be travelers, Sam suggested hopefully. Nathan shook his head. Travelers don't scout a cabin for an hour before approaching. These men are up to something. What do we do? Virginia asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. You stay in the back room, away from the windows, Nathan said firmly. Sam and I will handle this. I can fight, Sam protested, gripping his axe tighter. I'm not a child. No, but you're not a killer either. Nathan's voice was flat, matter of fact. These men are. I can tell by the way they move, the way they're approaching. They've done this before. Virginia had never heard Nathan speak with such cold certainty about violence. It reminded her that despite his kindness to her, he was still a man who lived alone in dangerous country and survived. Sam, listen to me, Nathan continued. I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you. Your sister's life might depend on it. The words sobered Sam instantly. He nodded, his young face set with determination. The knock came 20 minutes later. Two sharp raps that somehow managed to sound both polite and threatening. Nathan had positioned himself behind the table, rifle ready. Sam crouched near the window, axe within reach. Virginia huddled in the back room, one hand on her belly, the other clutching a kitchen knife Nathan had pressed into her palm. "Afternoon," a voice called from outside. It was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that could talk a man out of his horse or his life with equal ease. "Sorry to disturb you folks. We're just looking for shelter from the cold." Nathan didn't move toward the door. "Plenty of caves in these mountains. Find one of those." A pause, then laughter that held no warmth. "Now that's not very neighborly. We've been riding hard for days. Surely you can spare a place by your fire for fellow travelers?" "No room," Nathan replied curtly. "Keep riding." "The thing is," the voice continued, taking on a harder edge, "we know you're not alone in there. Saw smoke from more than one cooking fire, heard voices. Now, we're not unreasonable men, but we've had a hard journey and we're not inclined to take no for an answer." Virginia heard the sound of boots moving around the cabin, circling them. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure the baby could feel it. "I count 3 of you," Nathan called out, his voice carrying clearly. "Want to make it even odds? Come ahead. But know that the first man through that door dies, and I've got enough ammunition to make the other 2 regret following him." The circling footsteps stopped. "Now, friend, there's no need for hostility." But the smooth voice had lost some of its confidence. "We're just cold, hungry men looking for hospitality. Then you should have thought of that before you spent an hour scouting my property like wolves planning an attack." Virginia heard whispered conversation from outside, too low to make out the words. Then the voice returned, harder now. All pretense of civility dropped. "We know you've got a woman in there. Pregnant woman by the look of the washing on the line. Be a shame if something happened to her because you couldn't be reasonable." The threat hung in the cold air like smoke. Virginia saw Sam's knuckles go white around his axe handle, saw Nathan's finger move to his rifle's trigger. "You're making a mistake," Nathan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Threatening what's mine. Is she yours? Because word in town is that Thomas Campbell sold his pregnant daughter to pay his debts. Figured a woman in that situation might be grateful for some alternative companionship." Virginia felt bile rise in her throat. These men knew who she was, knew her history. They'd come here specifically for her. Nathan's response was to fire a warning shot through the window, splintering wood near where one of the men stood. Next one goes through flesh instead of timber. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, boots pounded across the porch. Something heavy slammed against the door. Sam sprang into action, bracing his shoulder against the barrier, while Nathan aimed at the largest gap in the shutters. "Sam!" Nathan barked. "The back window!" Sam spun just in time to see a man climbing through the rear window, knife gleaming in his hand. Without hesitation, the 15-year-old swung his axe in a wide arc that caught the intruder in the shoulder, sending him tumbling back outside with a scream of pain. "Good boy," Nathan grunted, firing another shot that sent the remaining attackers diving for cover. Virginia pressed herself against the wall, knife raised, as the sounds of battle raged around her. She could hear Nathan's rifle cracking, Sam shouting warnings, boots scrambling across the cabin floor. The baby kicked frantically, as if trying to escape the violence surrounding them. Then suddenly silence. Nathan's voice cut through the quiet. "Anyone still breathing out there, better start riding, because the next sounds you hear are going to be reload sounds and I've got all night." Virginia held her breath, listening. After what felt like an eternity, she heard the sound of horses' hooves retreating down the mountain trail. "Ginny?" Sam's voice was shaky but strong. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she called back, though her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold the knife. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his face grim but relieved. "They're gone. For now." "Will they come back?" Virginia asked. "Maybe. Men like that don't like being run off." Nathan set his rifle aside and moved to help her up. "But they know we're ready for them now. That might be enough to make them look for easier prey." Sam stood by the broken window, breathing hard, blood spattering his shirt from the man he'd fought off. I've never, I mean, I've never hurt anyone before. You did good, boy, Nathan said, and Virginia could hear genuine respect in his voice. Took courage to stand your ground like that. I couldn't let them hurt Jenny, Sam said simply. Nathan nodded. No, you couldn't. That makes you a man in my book. Something shifted in that moment. Virginia could see it in the way Nathan looked at her brother. Not as a naive boy anymore, but as someone who'd proven himself when it mattered. And she could see it in Sam, the way he stood straighter, carried himself with new confidence. We need to be more careful, Nathan said, moving to examine the damage to the window and door. Word's gotten out about Virginia being here. That means more men might come looking. Looking for what? Sam asked. Nathan's jaw tightened. Looking for a pregnant woman with no family protection and no legal standing. Some men see that as an opportunity. The ugly reality of her situation hit Virginia like a physical blow. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying it alone, in a world that saw unprotected women as fair game for any man cruel or desperate enough to take what he wanted. Then I guess it's good she's not as alone as they think, Sam said quietly. Nathan looked at him, something passing between the two men that Virginia couldn't quite read. No, Nathan agreed. I guess she's not. That evening, as they worked together to repair the damage from the attack, Virginia watched Nathan and Sam move around each other with new ease. The competitive edge was gone, replaced by the natural cooperation of men who'd fought together and survived. Thank you, she said to both of them as they sat down to a late dinner of stew and bread. For what? Nathan asked. For protecting me. For treating me like I'm worth protecting. Nathan met her eyes across the table. You are worth protecting. Any man who says different is a fool or a liar. Or both, Sam added, earning a small smile from Nathan. As Virginia lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the cabin and feeling her child move restlessly inside her, she thought about the choice she would eventually have to make. Sam offered her family, the comfort of blood ties and shared history. But Nathan offered something different: protection, respect, the kind of steady partnership that could weather any storm. The attack had shown her something important about both men. Sam, despite his youth, would fight for her without hesitation. Nathan, despite his claims of emotional distance, had called her "what's mine" in front of dangerous strangers. Neither man was perfect, and neither option was without risk. But for the first time since leaving her father's house, Virginia felt like she truly had a choice to make. Not between bad options and worse ones, but between different paths that could both lead to something resembling happiness. The baby kicked again, a strong flutter against her ribs that felt almost like approval. Whatever decision she made, Virginia realized, it would be hers to make freely. And that freedom, hard-won and carefully protected, might be the most valuable thing she'd gained from this strange mountain winter. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin, surrounded by two men who would kill or die to keep her safe, Virginia Campbell finally understood what it meant to be valued for more than just the price someone else had put on her head. The labor pains began on a February morning when the snow was falling thick enough to muffle sound, and the cabin felt like the only warm place left in the world. Virginia woke to a cramping so intense it stole her breath, and she knew immediately that after 9 months of waiting, her child had decided it was time to make an appearance. "Nathan?" she gasped, gripping the edge of the bed as another contraction seized her. He was awake instantly, moving from his bedroll by the fire with the swift efficiency she'd come to depend on. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "How far apart?" he asked, already moving to stoke the fire higher. "I don't know. This is only the second one." But Virginia's words cut off in a sharp cry as another wave of pain crashed over her, stronger than the first. "Sam!" Nathan called toward the shed. "Get in here, now!" Sam burst through the door, still pulling on his shirt, his face alert with concern. "What's wrong?" "The baby's coming," Nathan said, his voice calm but urgent. "I need you to fetch water from the well, then start boiling every pot we have, and bring those clean cloths from the shelf." Virginia watched through a haze of pain as both men moved with practiced efficiency around her. Nathan had clearly done this before, with his sister, she realized, and possibly other women in other circumstances she didn't want to think about. His hands were gentle but sure as he helped her into a more comfortable position. "How long?" she asked between contractions. "Hard to say with a first baby." Nathan placed a cool cloth on her forehead. "Could be hours, could be longer. But babies come when they're ready, not when we are." The next few hours passed in a blur of increasing pain and mounting exhaustion. Sam proved surprisingly helpful, following Nathan's instructions without question, holding Virginia's hand when the contractions were at their worst, talking to her about anything and everything to keep her mind occupied. "Remember when you taught me to fish?" he said during one of the calmer moments. "You were so patient, even when I kept tangling the line." "You were 7, Virginia gasped, "and determined to catch a fish bigger than your head." "I did, eventually." "Yes, you did." She squeezed his hand as another contraction built. "You always were stubborn." "Must run in the family," Nathan said dryly, earning a weak laugh from Virginia despite the pain. As the day wore on, Virginia found herself grateful for both men's presence. Sam provided the comfort of family, the familiar anchor of shared memories and unconditional love. Nathan provided competence and strength, the steady assurance that he would see her through this safely, whatever it took. But it was becoming clear that this wasn't going to be easy. The contractions were strong but irregular. The baby seemed reluctant to move into position, and Virginia was beginning to tire in a way that worried her. "Something's wrong," she said during a brief lull, her voice thin with exhaustion. Nathan checked her progress with clinical efficiency, his face carefully neutral. "Baby's positioned oddly. Not dangerous yet, but not ideal either." "What does that mean?" Sam asked, fear creeping into his voice. "It means we wait, and we help her work through it," Nathan replied. "Sometimes babies need to find their own way." The sun was setting when Virginia's water broke in a rush that left her gasping. The contractions immediately intensified, coming faster and harder than before. "That's it," Nathan said with satisfaction. "Now we're getting somewhere." But somewhere turned out to be a place of pain so intense, Virginia thought she might die from it. She heard herself screaming and felt distantly embarrassed by the sounds she was making, but Nathan and Sam seemed unperturbed. "You're doing fine," Nathan said, his voice steady and sure. "Better than fine. You're strong, Virginia. Stronger than you know." "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Sam's voice was fierce with conviction. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived, Father. You survived being abandoned. You survived those men who tried to hurt you. A baby's not going to defeat you now." Virginia looked at her 15-year-old brother and saw the man he was becoming. Strong, determined, loyal to his bones. When had that happened? When had the frightened boy she'd left behind grown into someone she could lean on? "I see the head," Nathan said suddenly, excitement creeping into his voice. "Come on, Virginia. One more push." She bore down with everything she had left, and suddenly the pain crested and broke like a wave, leaving her gasping and empty. Then she heard it, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "It's a girl," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion Virginia had never heard from him before. "A beautiful, healthy girl." He placed the baby on Virginia's chest, this tiny, perfect creature who looked nothing like Jonathan Rivers and everything like a miracle. She had dark hair that curled damply against her scalp and eyes that seemed to take in the whole world with serious attention. "Hello, little one," Virginia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama." Sam leaned over them both, his young face soft with wonder. "She's so small." "She'll grow," Nathan said, efficiently cleaning up with the supplies he'd prepared. "Give her a year or two, and she'll be running you both ragged." Virginia looked up at him, noting the way his hands trembled slightly as he worked, the way he kept glancing at her and the baby with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Nathan's eyes met hers, and for a moment the careful distance he maintained seemed to crack. "What will you name her?" Virginia looked down at her daughter, this unexpected gift born from pain and shame, and somehow transformed into pure love. "Grace," she said without hesitation. "Her name is Grace." "Grace Campbell," Sam said, testing the sound of it. "Grace Blackwood," Nathan said quietly, and both Virginia and Sam stared at him. "What?" Virginia asked. Nathan sat heavily in the chair beside her bed, running a hand through his hair. I know what we agreed. I know you're supposed to choose what happens next, where you go, who you build a life with. He looked up at her, his pale eyes fierce with something that might have been desperation. But I can't let you go. Either of you. Virginia felt her heart skip. Nathan, I love you, he said simply, as if the words were being torn from somewhere deep inside him. I didn't mean to, didn't want to, but I do, and I love that baby like she's my own. And I love your stubborn fool brother, who's brave enough to fight grown men with an axe. Sam made a sound that might have been protest or laughter. I'm not good with words, Nathan continued, his voice growing stronger. I'm not educated or refined or any of the things you probably deserve, but I can provide for you, protect you, love you for the rest of my life if you'll let me. Virginia stared at him, this man who'd taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, who'd cared for her through sickness and danger, who'd just helped bring her daughter safely into the world. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me, here, in this cabin, with this family we've somehow managed to create. Nathan's voice was steady now. Sure. I'm asking you to let me be Grace's father, and Sam's brother, and your husband if you'll have me. Virginia looked down at Grace, who was watching her with those serious dark eyes, then at Sam, who was trying very hard not to look like he was holding his breath, waiting for her answer. What about what I want? She asked softly. Nathan went very still. What do you want? Virginia smiled, feeling something warm and bright unfurling in her chest. I want exactly what you're offering. I want this family, this life, this future we can build together. She looked at Sam. If that's all right with you, I know you came here to bring me home. Sam grinned, the expression transforming his young face. This is home, Jenny. I figured that out weeks ago. Nathan leaned forward, his hand covering hers where it rested on Grace's tiny back. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to a mountain man with more scars than sense, living in the middle of nowhere with a brother who's still learning how to shave. I'm sure, Virginia said firmly. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Nathan smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and lit up his entire face. Then I guess I better figure out how to make you an honest woman. In the morning, Virginia said, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the crisis had passed. Tonight, I just want to hold my daughter and sleep in the house I'm never leaving again. Our house, Nathan corrected gently. Our house, Virginia agreed, and felt the last piece of her broken heart slot perfectly into place. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountain in pristine white. But inside the cabin, 3 adults and 1 tiny baby settled into the kind of peace that came from choosing love over fear, family over loneliness, and hope over the bitter lessons of the past. It wasn't the life Virginia had dreamed of as a girl, but it was better than any dream she'd ever dared to have. It was real, earned through struggle and pain, and the simple courage to keep believing that good things were still possible, even for a woman who'd been traded away like livestock and told she was worth nothing more than $200. Grace stirred against her chest, making the soft sounds of a contented baby, and Virginia knew with absolute certainty that she was worth everything. They all were. And tomorrow, when Nathan made good on his promise to marry her, she would begin the rest of her life as exactly who she'd always been meant to be. A woman who chose her own family, her own future, and her own definition of what it meant to be free. Spring came early to the Montana mountains that year, as if the world itself was eager to celebrate the new life growing in the Blackwood cabin. Virginia stood on the porch, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching Nathan and Sam work together to repair the winter damage to the shed. The easy partnership between them never failed to make her smile, her brother and her husband-to-be building something together with their own hands. They'd planned the wedding for the first week of May, when the preacher from the Valley settlement made his monthly rounds. It would be simple, just the 4 of them, and whatever neighbors could make the journey up the mountain. Virginia had sewn a new dress from fabric Nathan had ordered from town, pale blue wool that brought out her eyes and made her feel, for the first time in her life, truly beautiful. The sound of approaching horses shattered the peaceful morning. Nathan was already reaching for his rifle before the riders came into view, but his posture relaxed when he saw the lead horseman's collar. "It's the preacher," he called to Virginia, "and the sheriff." Virginia's stomach clenched. Sheriff visits rarely brought good news, especially not 3 days before her wedding. The two men dismounted with the weary air of travelers who'd been riding hard. Preacher Morrison was a kind man in his 60s who'd buried Nathan's sister and baptized her children. Sheriff Wade was younger, with the steady eyes of someone who'd seen enough of human nature to judge it fairly. "Nathan, Mrs. Campbell," the preacher said, tipping his hat. "Beautiful morning." "Reverend, Sheriff." Nathan's greeting was cordial but cautious. "You're early for the wedding." Sheriff Wade stepped forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "Actually, we came about something else, something we thought you all should know before the ceremony." Virginia felt grace stir against her chest and fought to keep her voice steady. "What kind of something?" "Your father's been arrested," Sheriff Wade said directly. "Thomas Campbell, caught trying to sell a young girl to a mining camp outside Helena. Girl was barely 14, claimed he was her guardian." The words hit Virginia like a physical blow. She'd known her father was capable of cruelty, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. Arrested for what? Human trafficking, fraud, assault. The girl tried to fight, and he beat her pretty badly. The sheriff's voice was grim. "When we searched his belongings, we found records. Lots of them. Your sale wasn't the first, Mrs. Campbell. Wasn't even close." Sam made a sound like he'd been punched. "How many?" "At least a dozen girls over the past 3 years. Some sold outright. Others rented out for specific periods." Sheriff Wade's jaw tightened. "Always girls in desperate situations. Pregnant, orphaned, indebted. Women who had no one to speak for them." Virginia sank into the chair Nathan had carved for her, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Grace whimpered, sensing her mother's distress. "There's more," Preacher Morrison said gently. "Some of the girls didn't survive. 2 are confirmed dead, 3 more missing and presumed dead. Your father's looking at the gallows, Mrs. Campbell." Nathan placed a protective hand on Virginia's shoulder. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because the territorial prosecutor wants Virginia's testimony," Sheriff Wade said. "Her case was the one that led us to the others. The girl we caught him with remembered hearing about the pregnant one sold to the mountain man. That's how we traced the pattern." "I'll testify," Virginia said immediately, her voice stronger than she felt. "If it helps those other girls, if it stops him from hurting anyone else, I'll testify." Sam stepped closer, his young face hard with anger. "Good. He needs to pay for what he did. To all of them." The trial was held in Helena 3 weeks later. Virginia rode down from the mountain with Nathan, Grace, and Sam, her heart heavy with the stories she'd heard about her father's other victims. Some were younger than she'd been, some older. All had been vulnerable, alone, desperate enough to trust a man who spoke of helping them. The courthouse was packed. Many of the surviving girls had come to testify, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and determination that Virginia recognized from her own mirror. They were no longer victims. They were witnesses, speaking truth to power in voices that refused to be silenced. Virginia's testimony was simple and direct. She told the court about being dragged from her bed, about the 3-day journey in the wagon, about being handed over to Nathan like a piece of property in exchange for $200. She spoke about the fear, the isolation, the certainty that she would die alone and unmourned. But she also spoke about survival, about Nathan's unexpected kindness, about Sam's courage, about Grace sleeping peacefully in the cabin while her parents worked to build something good from the wreckage of the past. "The defendant sold me because he saw me as worthless," Virginia said, looking directly at her father for the first time since that terrible morning. "But he was wrong. I wasn't worthless then, and I'm not worthless now. None of us are." Thomas Campbell looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his crimes. He didn't meet her eyes. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out within the month. Virginia felt no satisfaction in the verdict, only a deep sadness for all the lives her father had damaged or destroyed. Justice was important, but it couldn't undo the harm that had been done. After the trial, one of the other survivors approached Virginia as she stood outside the courthouse with Grace in her arms. "Thank you," the young woman said. She couldn't have been more than 16, with scars on her face that spoke of recent violence. "For speaking up, for not staying hidden." Virginia shifted Grace to one arm so she could take the girl's hand. "What's your name?" "Sarah? Sarah Mitchell." "Where will you go now, Sarah?" The girl shrugged, trying to look brave. "Don't know. Haven't figured that out yet." Virginia looked at Nathan, who was deep in conversation with Sam and the sheriff. She thought about the cabin on the mountain, about the spare room they'd been planning to turn into a nursery for future children. "How do you feel about mountain living?" Virginia asked. Sarah blinked. "Ma'am, we could use help with the baby, and my brother could use someone to argue with besides my husband." Virginia smiled. "It's not much, but it's safe, and it's honest work. You'd do that? For someone you don't even know?" Virginia looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around them. "Someone once gave me a chance when I needed it most. Seems like the right thing to pass it along." The wedding took place a week later, on a hill overlooking the valley where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. Preacher Morrison performed the ceremony with Sarah, Sam, and little Grace as witnesses. Nathan had carved wedding rings from mountain ash, simple bands that caught the morning sunlight and seemed to glow with their own inner fire. "Do you, Nathan Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Nathan said, his voice steady and sure. "Do you, Virginia Campbell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Virginia looked at Nathan's weathered face, at the love shining in his pale blue eyes, at the man who'd taken her broken and made her whole. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise for all the years ahead. Grace gurgled happily in Sam's arms, as if she approved of the proceedings. That night, as they celebrated with simple food and homemade music, Virginia stood apart for a moment, watching her new family. Nathan was teaching Sam a card game while Sarah held Grace, cooing softly to the baby. The cabin glowed with lamplight and laughter, filled with people who'd chosen each other despite everything the world had thrown at them. "Happy?" Nathan asked, appearing beside her. Virginia leaned into his solid warmth, feeling Grace's tiny hand curl around her finger. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Good," Nathan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "because this is just the beginning." Virginia smiled, watching Sam cheat shamelessly at cards while Sarah pretended not to notice. Her father was dead, executed the previous week for his crimes. Jonathan Rivers had married a banker's daughter and never spared a thought for the child he'd left behind. The woman who'd been sold like livestock no longer existed. In her place stood Virginia Blackwood, wife, mother, sister, friend. A woman who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about the daily choice to love and protect and build something beautiful together. Grace yawned against her chest, tiny fingers spreading like stars against the blue wool of her wedding dress. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow from the high peaks and the promise of wildflowers from the valleys below. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of shame and abandonment. And it was more than enough. It was everything. And so, across the rugged mountains of Montana Territory, another tale finds its ending. Not in the shame that Thomas Campbell intended for his daughter, but in the love that transformed her pain into purpose. Virginia's story reminds us that we are never truly worthless, no matter what others may say or do to us. That family isn't always born from blood, but from the daily choice to stand by each other through life's storms, and that sometimes the people who seem hardest and most distant are the ones whose hearts hold the deepest capacity for love. From a pregnant girl traded like livestock came a woman who chose her own destiny. From a mountain man's isolation came a father's fierce protection. From a terrified boy came a young man of courage, and from the ashes of abandonment grew a family stronger than any blood tie could ever be. Have you ever felt discarded by those who should have protected you? Have you found family in unexpected places? Share your stories of second chances and chosen family in the comments below. If this tale of transformation and redemption touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Out here in the Wild West, there are still countless stories of courage, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit waiting to be told. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are forged not by birth, but by the simple, profound choice to love without condition. This is Wild West Stories. Thank you for journeying with us.